Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Call 0345 6060 973.
10 minutes before 8, we'll continue to assess the strength of the special relationship in a moment, but let's get an update on affairs in Afghanistan, in Kabul, from Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab, who joins me now. Yesterday, you were able to tell us, or you wrote that they had 1,372 British nationals and their dependents, 3,866 former interpreters and others, 1,167 nationals from other countries and 226 eligible people, including British embassy staff. What are those figures updated this morning, Foreign Secretary? Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. So over the last 24 hours, we secured around 2,000 extra people out, which is the combination, the total of those groups. If you take it since the 15th of August, we've secured safe passage of over 9,000 people. If you go back to April and the commercial flights and our message to British nationals to leave Afghanistan, the start of the Arab scheme for Afghan workers, over 11,000 people have returned to the UK. No country has done better in this regard, and I think it's the most challenging and the biggest safe passage airlift operation conducted in living memory. But of course, what we're focused on in the hours and days ahead is getting out the residual number of people that are still in Kabul or still in Afghanistan.
You say hours and days. You know I'm going to press you on this, Foreign Secretary. Are we talking days?
Yes, I think we're talking days rather than weeks, but the precise time frame will depend on how much the military planners need to get out at the end of the evacuation, their personnel and their equipment. So what we'll focus, again, we've got the output because of the brilliant team we've got in Kabul, backed up by the Foreign Office's emergency response team. It's a cross-government initiative. We're going to keep maximising that output, 2,000 people in the last 24 hours. And so the days ahead will be critical, and we'll get as many people out, the Brits, the Afghans that worked for us. We've already got the Chevening scholars coming out. We've got journalists and others, female rights activists, scheduled to come out in the hours and days ahead. We're going to maximise the number we can, given the situation and subject to the situation on the ground. Everything
looks clear in hindsight, but can I put it to you, we should have perhaps been looking to move more people earlier in the piece. You mentioned from April around 11,000, but you also said from the 15th of August 9,000. So April until the middle of August, broadly speaking, 2,000. Look, it's so easy in hindsight, but we could have done a lot better, Foreign Secretary.
Well, you're absolutely right that there's been something like 2,500 since April. But of course, it was only as the situation deteriorated, and that came late in terms of the collapse of authority in Kabul. Given that trajectory, it wasn't, if you like, a slow incremental deterioration. That's why you've seen this last surge, or a relatively late surge to the door. The point that I think is obvious and demonstrable from April is that we had the capacity, and we were providing the support, consular support, the Arab scheme for Afghan workers, to get people out. But dealing with the situation on the ground is been very challenging. Everyone can see that from their TV screens, and it's even more complex than that is being able to show.
Can you give my listeners a rough idea? How many individuals are left hoping for evacuation?
Well, as I say, we've got over 11,000 out.
No, sorry, how many are left? My apologies, in Kabul.
Yeah, look, it's difficult to gauge the numbers because it's not just those that are left, but it's those that actually want to come out. So just to give you a sense, we've secured the return of around 2,500 British nationals, including their dependents. Almost all of the mono-British nationals, that's just straight British nationals with documentation, have now returned, almost all. So we're left with the very complex cases, which sometimes means large family units of whom some are nationals, some aren't, some are documented, some aren't. So it's working through those, and we'll get through as many of those cases and make sure that those that are eligible can come back in the way that we have done, as I said, since April.
Looking at events yesterday in the G7 summit, is the special relationship over, Foreign Secretary?
No, of course it isn't. It matters a huge amount.
You say, of course it isn't. It wasn't particularly forthcoming or fruitful conversations between the Prime Minister and the President Biden, was it?
Well, I think the Prime Minister was right to convene the G7 as a whole. I think a lot of countries wanted to test, can we have some more days? It's very clear from that we'll now be working till the end of August. We're going to have to work with that reality. But I think also, as well as safe passage, it was right that the PM got the major economies, the major countries together to not just talk about the safe passage, but counter-terrorism, the humanitarian situation, what we're going to do to exercise moderating influence on human rights. And of course, the Taliban is saying, and overnight their spokesperson says that they want to avoid the brain drain from Afghanistan. And the only way they'll be able to achieve that is by exercising a less malign and more inclusive approach than the previous Taliban regime. And we've got to exercise every lever we've got at our disposal to try and exercise maximum moderating influence. You've got to do that with a broader caucus of countries, and that's why the PM got the G7 together.
And I'm sure he tried very hard, but isn't this a role for the United Nations, Foreign Secretary?
Yeah, absolutely. They will have a role, which is, so at the G7 meeting, the UN Secretary General was there. I spoke to, in the last 24 hours, Jean Arnaud, the Afghan Special Envoy from the Secretary General. What we want to try and achieve is not just G7 approach. We want to bring in the permanent members of the Security Council. That includes China, who I've spoken to my opposite number, will include Russia. We also need to bring in the regional partners, Pakistan, India. I've spoken to both of those foreign ministers. And the UN will have an important coordinating role, but also a role in relation to the humanitarian effort, which will require the Taliban to allow a permissive environment, if I could put it that way, because Western countries and donor countries will not give directly to the Taliban. They'll want to give via humanitarian agencies and UN agencies that are on the ground. If that's going to happen, the Taliban will have to do some things too.
Okay. Is it true now that the Taliban are preventing Afghan nationals from trying to get to Kabul airport?
We've seen pitted examples of this right in recent weeks, and the Taliban are saying that they, on the one hand, they don't want their talented people to leave, and I think that what's happening on the ground reflects that. Equally, they've given us assurances about getting out our nationals, but also the people that work for us and other groups. So we will hold them to those assurances, and I think it's a critically important test. If the Taliban wants to avoid a collapse of their economic, their social system, they're going to need to engage constructively with the international community and the UK, the US, and many others. So this will be an important test for them, and whether this iteration of the Taliban is less malign and capable of being more inclusive than the previous one.
Notwithstanding the message in your article in yesterday's Daily Telegraph, candidly, Foreign Secretary, this is what defeat looks like, isn't it?
Look, no one is saying that we wanted to be in this situation.
But this is defeat, isn't it? When we can really only operate with the compliance of the Taliban, this is a defeat.
Look, we deal with the reality. I think the answer to that question... Can I
put it to you again, the reality? It is a defeat, isn't it?
Well, it depends. It depends. If the Taliban, given the levers we have at our disposal, the international financial institutions that they want to access, the ODA, the avoiding further sanctions, if they want to engage in a more inclusive way, they're going to have to bring in other factions of Afghan political representation. There is therefore the possibility of a more positive, more constructive regime. But look, we're not happy about the situation and concerned about the situation, but we deal with the reality as we see it. And our priorities are counter-terrorism, safe passage of our nationals and those that work for us, and trying to avoid a devastating humanitarian crisis which looms. And it looms for the Taliban, which I don't think wants to inherit that, and would have an impact on regional stability as well.
Can you just briefly take you back to some figures you quoted us earlier? You said that no country has done better than the United Kingdom, 11,000 repatriated. We have double-checked this figure. The United States have got 70,000 people out, so clearly they've done better. Have you got?
Well, I mean, but proportionately to the nationals and the size of our country, I don't think in the time frame any country. We're
dealing with people on the ground in Afghanistan, aren't we? We're not dealing with a chunk of the United States population. It's what you are presented with. So for you to say we've done better than any other nation, 11,000, plays the United States 70,000, is palpably wrong.
As a proportion of the nationals and the workers that they have in country.
So there are 7 times the number of Americans, are there?
I don't think if you look at the number and the quality and the range of people that any country has done better. But look, it's a team effort. We're working with the United States, with the other countries, and I think we should be, of course, surging every sinew and effort to get everyone out or as many people out by the deadline we've got. But the fact that we've secured the safe passage of 11,000 people out is a significant achievement. I don't think it's been done before, certainly not in living memory of the UK.
Just the last couple of things. It's reported that the Prime Minister is thinking that billions of pounds of frozen Afghan assets could be unfrozen if the Taliban were to grant more time to allow people to leave the country. Would you support that?
Of course, the PM and I are very clear. If the Taliban want access to the international financial institutions and the resources that will enable them to avoid the collapse of institutions, the economy, they will have to do a range of things too. Safe passage is the top priority, but it's not the only one. They'll need to give clear, credible, verifiable assurances that they're clamping down on the risk of terrorist attacks from outside of Afghanistan. There are other things around the way they treat women, but that gives you an example of one of the levers that we've got, such as they are.
So you would support that, the unfreezing, just to be specific?
I support the use of all the tools and all the levers we've got, including access to financial institutions, and that will be a multilateral decision, the scope for further sanctions, and indeed the being clear on the assurances in order to provide any aid would never be done to the Taliban, but via third-party groups like the UN, like NGOs. They will have to step up to the plate and provide assurances and demonstrate through their conduct that they can live by those assurances if they want to access those kind of funds and avoid the collapse of the situation in Afghanistan.
A couple of other matters, reminding, of course, the listeners your role in Brexit. We're waking up to headlines today that retail crisis stocks are at their lowest levels since 1983. Is this as a result of the Brexit that you helped deliver?
Well, I think there's been an issue reported, I think referring to the HGVs and the question of whether produce can get through to the stores.
This is the Confederation of British Industry saying stock levels in relation to expected sales are at their lowest level in August since tracking began in 1983.
And I think the reason
many are saying it's the Brexit that you helped deliver.
And I think they're attributing it to the availability of staff for HGVs. And what we're doing is streamlining the process to get more UK and other people being able to man those HGVs. I would point, of course, to the huge opportunities that we talked about in relation to Brexit, the growing number of free trade deals that we've not just done, concluded, but are seeking to conclude, including the Trans-Pacific, the CPTPP, Trans-Pacific free trade deal, which will create enormous trading opportunities. And Liz Truss is working her shoulder to the wheel on all of those. So we'll deal with the HGV situation. I think we've got the Department for Transport have got a good grip on that. We'll manage those challenges, but we're also ready to grasp the enormous opportunities. And I think the Trade Secretary has done a great job in all of that, and the Foreign Office is backing her up all the way.
All right, lastly, it was reported on the weekend that it was requested you came back from that holiday, now that infamous holiday, on Friday, but you did not return until the early hours of Monday morning. Is that true?
No, that's not true. I'm not going to get drawn on all of that. I answered those questions over the weekend. Our focus as a government, mine, was on making sure we secured the airport and the capacity to get as many people back as possible, and we got over 9,000 people back. And I think that shows you that in the Foreign Office, myself, and across government, we were on the job.
All right, and lastly, has anyone spoken to Paul or Pen Farthing? He's the former Marine who's running an animal charity in Afghanistan. He's trying to get a number of his colleagues out. There had been exchanges between him and your colleague, Ben Wallace. Have we picked up those communications again? Has someone spoken to the Marine?
Well, there's engagement with his charity. We're trying to do all we can for the staff, but in terms of the animals and the question of whether they can be prioritised ahead of the other people that are trying to get out, I don't have anything more to add to what the Defence Secretary, I think, rightly said over the last 24 hours.
Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab, thank you for your time appearing here on LBC when 4 minutes after 8 news is next.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, Joe Biden says the sooner American troops can leave Afghanistan, the better because of the increased